Hello, Editor Danny here. Unfortunate PSA, my audio quality for this episode is not quite up to the usual standard. Unfortunately, at the time of recording, I did not realize that StreamYard swapped back to my MacBook's microphone as opposed to my actual mic. And given that I didn't notice that until editing the episode several days later, it was entirely too late to try to run it back. So, unfortunately, that means that the audio quality is a little rough. Nothing unlistenable, but still dramatically reduced nonetheless. So, I have figured that out. I have remedied that issue. And for the next episode, JT will also be back and we will resume service as normal. But this episode, again, is a little rough. So I do apologize for that. But otherwise, enjoyed the episode. Bye bye. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chicanery. It is, well, usually say hostesses, but it is just me this week. Unfortunately, due to some minor scheduling issues, JT couldn't make it, so you'll have to suffer with me for the next about hour. However, we do have a very, very special guest today. One, Miss Bria. Say hello.
Hi everyone, my name is Bria and this is my first time on here. It's usually
Yes.
JT, so I'm taking her spot today.
Yes. So the reason why we have Bria on is because this is going to be an episode focused entirely on the US Grand Prix, and a certain somebody was on location.
I
So
was
first,
like,
oh sorry. So first of all, just tell me about the US Grand Prix experience, COTA, the paddock, the energy, just everything. I want to know. The inquiring minds deserve to know.
I know. I didn't really know what to expect. You can read so much on Reddit about what'll happen at a Grand Prix, but it's nothing like it until you get there. So when I got there on Thursday, I did F1's experience. So I got to walk around the track and do like a track tour. And so I was able to get more of a better understanding of where the track worked and what there is to do around there. Also got to scope out some garages. I got to see Lewis's garage and take a picture in front of it. So that was the highlight of the weekend. But I will say it's extremely hot. I didn't know it was that bad until you get there. And also, I would say the atmosphere is great. You know, you hear about last year where Red Bull fans and Mercedes fans had issues with each other and bullying at other tracks, but I didn't experience that here. It was all good vibes all around, and everyone was happy to be there. There were little digs at one another, but it was nothing personal. You really you have to go to a race to fully appreciate the energy that's around there because it's probably the best weekend of my life. I don't let the outcome of the race dictate that taking away anything from it, but it was the best weekend ever, and I would love to go back again.
Yeah, we'll talk about the outcome of the race in a little bit.
Of
But
course.
so it sounds like this was your first time attending a Grand Prix.
Yes, any form of motorsports. This was my first race.
Oh wow! Well, going to the U.S. Grand Prix, that is a hell of a way to inaugurate being on location the
Yeah,
races.
it's gonna be hard to beat it, seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who spent a large chunk of their life about an hour south on IH-35 in San Antonio, yes, it is hot there this time of year. I always find it, yeah, and I know it's scheduling and stuff, but I always think it is hilarious that F1 likes to roll into Austin in, middle of October when it's still, just ambient. It's, 90 plus degrees still.
Hmm.
And then certainly, in the paddock and, with all of that tarmac dotted about, I know track temps were much, much higher than that over the course of the
Oh yes,
weekend.
exactly.
But speaking of the course of the weekend, this was yet again, this was another sprint race weekend. So first of all, well, Max wins the sprint race. And Science chose the interesting strategy of being on softs for the sprint.
That was a
Um,
choice.
it indeed was a choice. And because this is a sprint weekend, nobody is quite going 100% in the sprint. So much
At
so
all.
I know members of the broadcast were noting that it was even amongst the admittedly very low bar of these races, that this was kind of a sleepy one.
It was. I can't even remember anything from that race. I don't even remember it happening. It wasn't eventful at all. It seemed like towards the end, drivers just like accepted their fate and they're like, I'll finish where I finish. There's no point of pushing harder and ruining our cars for the week.
Absolutely. Well, thankfully, JT was sweet enough to leave a template for show notes. So I do have notes of what happened during the sprint, and I watched some highlights before we started recording. Probably the biggest thing is that even for as relatively static as the sprint races are, Aston Martin did not have a great time. Stroll retired the car, and Alonso finished pretty far away down the order. I know they have been outpaced in development, but this was still, like I said, for a sprint race, this was not a very good showing.
At all. It seems like they went backwards at one point from the beginning of the season to now.
Yeah, yep. Unfortunately, that does seem to be the case. But in certainly more interesting news, the inaugural F1 Academy season wrapped up, and Marta Garcia is the first champion. Congratulations to her. Super cool to see. And and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but there has certainly been a fair bit of discourse around the F1 Academy. It effectively supplants the W Series. Folks are hoping that this will be a more permanent way up through the FIA ladder than the W Series ever was. But regardless, like I said, congratulations, Martha. And moving on to the main race. Well, I guess this is a question that we always ask when we do this. Is it a good race? Yes or no? I'll let you have the floor initially.
I will say it was a good race to start, and the ending in person it was, because the start, I didn't expect Lando Norris to get up front that easily. I don't think many people did. It was kind of a shocker to the people around us. We were like, wait, Lando's leading? And then what happened to Lewis? Because he was third. And then the passes Lewis did, you remember how great he is during that race, so we appreciate that. But towards the ending, when Max took the lead, you kind of were like, well, we've seen this story again. But when Lewis came out of nowhere after they put him on the correct tires, you were like, wait, we have a chance. It was as the laps went down, you would see him gaining and gaining every time they came around. So I don't know if it was different when I watched the broadcast because you were thinking, oh, well, this is over. But when you're in person, you don't really have a storyline and you don't know what's going on. You only know those brief seconds the driver passed you. So maybe on the last lap, we realized, well, Lewis isn't going to be able to catch him, but it was an entertaining last few laps. So I would make that a good race compared to other races this season. At least to me, I would.
Yeah, that's fair. I rate this one certainly among the season. I actually rate this one pretty highly myself. Lewis put in, this was like 2018 era Lewis. Honestly, he drove the absolute wheels off that car. Yes, the start was manic as anything. Granted, the way T1 is profiled, of course, everybody kind of bottles up. It doesn't matter what series it is. We've seen it F1. Sports cars in IMSA, NASCAR when they go to COTA. It's the same story.
Yes.
With the way, like I said, it bottlenecks. So certainly if you can get clear at the start, then you have a pretty clear run for that first section of circuit. But we didn't really have that. Lando, sorry, wrong L, got ahead, but didn't vanish away immediately. And yes, the tire strategy. Well, there were a couple. This was kind of a twofold issue with strategy from Mercedes. Traditionally, we know this. They've never been great. And I think even Mercedes themselves have periodically come out to say that, well, for having, better part of a decade, they had comfortably the fastest car on the grid.
And the greatest, yes.
Yeah, and you don't really need strategy when you can just clobber everything everywhere now, do you? However, they don't have that advantage, and truth be told, haven't for the last few years. And this is where their strategy or lack thereof has let particularly Lewis down a number of times. First
Exactly.
of all, trying to run like 5 or 6 laps longer, because if I remember correctly, Max pitted in was like lap 17, lap 18
Yes.
for another set of mediums, and Lewis didn't come in until lap 22, lap 21, lap 22, and running
Didn't they
that.
put him on hard tires as well?
Yes, they did.
Ooh,
Yep, not only did they leave him out super late, but they went and put him on hards. The idea being to try to one stop it, even though with the track temp, tire deg was through the roof again. And that was never really likely to work. But I do want to pose to you. A lot of folks felt like if Lewis had, and Mercedes had run the correct strategy, Lewis had a real shot at winning. But even though the W14 did see a batch of upgrades this weekend, I am not convinced that that car would have had the pace. Certainly, judging by what we saw in the sprint race. What do you think?
I do think there could have been a chance, but it wasn't just based on the tires. It was the pit stop as well. Those couple of seconds make a huge difference. I can't remember. It was a 3 point something. I don't have my notes in front of me that'll show the pit stops, but it was another race of if we had more laps, maybe we could have caught Max, or if that pit stop wasn't as long as it was, I do think he could have had a shot. And if they put on the correct tires to begin with, it's the little mistakes that they made that hurt them in the long run. I think this was one of the races that you could have said Lewis could have possibly won this.
Fair enough. Yeah, I know the stop for him on hards was a little over 3.5 seconds, 3.5, 3.6. And Max's stop, which truth be told, by Red Bull standards, wasn't really all that great. It was like a 3.1, 3.2. I don't remember what the second set of stops was, but I seem to think it was fairly similar all around. I think Red Bull was actually slightly quicker, closer to 3 seconds flat that go. But yeah, I mean it's the little mistakes that they compound. And it's been Mercedes's issue for the last, well, really forever. They had the pace advantage to mask it before, but these days it just feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts
That's a very good way to put it.
anymore. But in addition to certainly the scrap at the front with Lando, Max, and Lewis, it was quite busy behind. Ocon and Piastri got together very early in the race, with it being wheel damage, subsequently suspension damage that took out Ocon, or sorry, no, I took out Piastri rather, and it
Yeah,
was and it
with
was
damage to
side
his
pod,
radiator. Yeah,
yeah, and it was side pod damage for Ocon, if I've got that correct.
correct.
Um, so yeah, just I mean, Coda's narrow, the cars are big, and bumping into each other like that just doesn't work. And Alonso retired with, from what I understand, it was floor damage. The broadcast only made a quick note of it, but it just completes what was a fairly miserable weekend for Aston Martin yet again.
I could say, didn't last Stroll have an okay finish? I believe he finished in the points, so I guess that was a highlight for him at least.
Yeah, I do believe it was. I do believe he scooped up the last point. I do believe it was P10 is where he ended up going on to finish. It was P9 or P10.
It was
Um,
actually P7.
oh, okay. He was higher up the
Wow.
points than I
Okay, he
thought.
got 6 points.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go.
Even better.
Um, yeah, indeed. And I mean, and truth be told, actually, this is a fantastic segue. He needs this right now.
Exactly.
Granted, not really so much in the team, because, well, his father owns the team. So
He's
his
not going
ability will,
anywhere.
yeah, his ability certainly from within Aston Martin will never be called into question. But a lot of folks in the last few weeks have been talking about Stroll's performances or really lack thereof, and if he's Formula One material or not.
Mhm.
I don't think he is. I never really thought that he is, but I think he'd be wicked in sports cars, personally. Could they ship him off to the Valkyrie hypercar program? I feel like he could clean house pretty well.
Could be. I'm not really. That could be an option, yes.
But
It's kind of like, what if you didn't drive for your father's team?
yeah, and
You would
that's
see him a
guess
different way. Hmm.
yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with that. It's just that he drives for Papa's team.
Papa's
Dad's
team.
not gonna put his boy out of the team. But
No
I do.
matter what you do, you're gonna have a ride. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's I like I said, I would genuinely like somebody within that team to kind of look at Lance sort of objectively, but I feel like it'll be 3 or 4 years from now, and we'll probably be having this conversation again
Again.
about if Lance is F1 material. But anyhow, moving on to the end of race, because that's where things really get spicy. Um, First of all, the booing on the podium, booing at the podium ceremony. A lot of folks online took that as being, and even some folks within sort of broadcast commentary and F1 broadly took that as booing Max, which I'm sure there probably was a little bit, but everybody forgot about the dude
Mhm.
in the wheelchair that was sitting off to the left of him.
It was probably a mix of both.
Yeah.
That okay, yeah, it was a man in the wheelchair, but I would say it was both. I wasn't exactly by the podium when it happened, but I could say during the driver's engagement, it was a lot pro Checo because when they had Red Bull come out, it was more Checo chants. It was like Checo, and it sounds crazy, but you know those AI pictures that they do of the drivers back in high school?
Oh, uh huh.
They had one of Max, but when it came time to Checo, she was like, "Oh, we don't have one of Checo." You would have thought they did something terrible. It was booze and Checos. I felt so bad for the moderator. She was trying to get through it, but the crowd wouldn't have letting her have it. So I think it might have been for Max too, just a little bit, but probably a lot for the man in the wheelchair too. But it was a tough crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worth noting this is, yes, the US Grand Prix, but this is in
Hmm.
Austin. This is in South Texas. You know, truth be told, Checo isn't that far from his home crowd. Um, and a lot of people, and again, this horse has been beaten to death online, but certainly the way that Red Bull has treated Sergio throughout his tenure at Red Bull has been suboptimal, to put it politely. Um,
Exactly. I mean, you say certain things about him and his where he comes from. People have a bad can have see it in a bad way. I don't care how you put it. It's I don't like the way he's treated sometimes. I'm not even a Red Bull fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not either, actually. And it's funny. There was a tweet going around actually just earlier today, when with Lewis talking about
Ah,
Sergio and
yes.
just his ability as a Formula One driver. And it boggles my mind that it feels like right now the biggest cheerleader for Sergio is not anybody within Red Bull, but rather the lead driver at what is, I guess, ostensibly the rival team.
Exactly. Like people were like, "Oh, Lewis is making things up," but in a way, he can kind of relate to how Checo's feeling. You being in your own team, you're being treated harshly, and you have team not team principals, but people who work on the car are saying things about you and basing your personality off where you come from. So having it in house can make it tougher, and you gotta wonder how Checo's feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, Checo at this point is kind of an institution on the grid. I don't
Mhm.
know how many years our friend has left in the sport generally, but I would love to see him move to a team that seems to really appreciate him because for those in the audience who have forgotten, Sergio got the short end of the stick with Lawrence Stroll in the takeover of Racing Point. After he
That
had gone out of his way to effectively because to basically save the team as it was going into administration.
you just taught me something new because I was not aware of that.
Yeah, yeah. Checo got booted from Racing Point. He That was when Lance, his son, basically got installed. Well,
Mm,
actually, more accurately, it was during that changeover to Aston Martin because Lance had been in the team. He had been in the team for, I think, a year or two leading up to the Aston Martin changeover. But they dumped Sergio to get Sebastian to get that.
interesting. Learn
And
something new. Have something
yep,
to research into later on today.
yeah, absolutely. That whole last, basically 18 months of Racing Point, it's wild. It's genuinely very, very interesting. I would encourage you to go have a look at the Racing Point to Aston Martin swap. Um, but yeah, no, Checo is a popular driver. And so yeah, certainly, unfortunately, Max is going to take some stick. But like I said, certainly having Governor Abbott at the podium ceremonies absolutely did not help. Um, it is no secret within the United States and even broadly just the world, as Texas was in the news pretty consistently for like a solid year about increasingly, well, frankly, increasingly fascist policy changes. But continuing to after the race, and this is absolutely where all hell breaks loose, where on the plank. It saw Lewis and Leclerc disqualified from the US Grand Prix.
That's sucked. I was in Target after the race and I was like, what did this notification say? I was like, wait, what happened? I was just so confused and upset. And then I kept reading. I was like, this sounds like a disqualification after this perfect, well, not perfect, but a really good weekend disqualification because he was out of compliance for 0.05 millimeters.
Yes,
Oof,
exactly. It's an old rule in the rule book. It stems from the early 90s on
wow.
where on the plank to combat a few teams. I think most notably, I guess it would have probably been Benetton in the period, exploiting the plank to basically to smooth out airflow underneath the car, which then helps underbody downforce. Um, and this is the first time, believe it or not, that anybody, let alone two drivers, have actually fallen afoul of this rule in the regs.
That's
But
crazy.
but yes, it was 5 hundredths of a millimeter that Lewis was found out of compliance. I actually had a little bit of looking before the show. I couldn't find any conclusive numbers on quite what the margin was for Leclerc, but yes, just I mean, like thickness of a strand of hair
It's,
out of compliance.
it's they aren't beating the allegations of we're against Mercedes when you see things like that at all.
Absolutely.
Especially when you see if the chart from the race is correct, where it said the number of times that teams have randomly, quote, randomly been checked, Mercedes and Ferrari have been 5 times each, or Red Bull has only been twice. You kind of like raise your eyebrows, like, I don't know, this doesn't seem as random or as a chance as you think it is.
Yeah, and I was just getting to that. Yeah, just the checks being Ferrari and Mercedes, yeah, 5 times as a close. Yeah, Red Bull and McLaren twice. I think Williams and AlphaTauri, I think, haven't been checked at all. I mean, their
At
cars are
all.
not.
Red
Yeah,
Bull Junior, they have not, not at
yeah. I mean, but
all.
those cars are not consistently very quick, so
Yeah.
that's not super surprising. But yeah, it is. It's incredible, and yes, it certainly, from the FIA's perspective, it doesn't look great. Um, it's worth noting, and we've seen this before with the end of the they call it the Braun taught Schumacher era of domination with Ferrari, and how that was very promptly brought to an end between a regulations change that basically Ferrari didn't get right and Renault got very correctly. There were some allegations that Renault might have been up to no good in that period, but the FIA basically shrugged and said whatever because it stopped Ferrari's domination, which was quantifiably hurting the sport. And Red Bull has ostensibly done the same thing to Mercedes, and so the FIA is like, nah, whatever.
Exactly. It's like they turned a blind eye.
hmm And in this case, maybe not so much turning a blind eye, but rather choosing basically to nail Ferrari and Mercedes to the wall on minor technical regs, and choosing to give, at the very least, not check Red Bull. Um, but and it's worth noting and saying all of this that it has spawned all manner of conspiracy theories from F1 fans of all sects, and even including some mainstream media about it.
I can
Um,
understand why you would start questioning the way that things are happening randomly. It's not a good look, but I guess you can say the rules are the rules, but it looks suspect to me if you ask me just as an outsider.
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I followed Formula One for a very long time now, so
Hmm.
I know how kind of the FIA tend to move with this kind of stuff, and it's not great. I know the idea of the Mohammed bin Salam era of the FIA. The idea is a bit more in the way of accountability. I'm not quite sure if they've achieved that, but
No, no, you're right. They have it.
the idea is at least to put on an air of things being a little bit less clandestine. Well, truth be told, every other FIA president previous, be it Jean Todt, Michael Massey, and certainly during the Max Mosley era of Formula One. Goodness gracious! But yeah, no, this, like I said, this doesn't feel great. Fundamentally, it is a technical reg. Um, and in fairness, it does seem to be one that Red Bull adjusted from. Jamie Price, who is a well-regarded motorsports photographer, was at COTA, and he took some snaps. And the Red Bull, its credit, was running significantly more rear rake than it usually does. Granted, Red Bull likes that as a aerodynamic and suspension philosophy
Mhm.
generally, but relative to the Ferrari and the Mercedes, it was quite a bit, and that may have been to keep from running afoul of basically plank wear and also potentially floor damage, because, like I said, that's what seems to have taken out Alonso. So they did do the correct thing. But what I find most interesting is that Charles, in the aftermath of all of this, said that they did check wear on the plank after practice and didn't find any. So I'd be curious to know what's caused this.
That's interesting. If I was Charles, I probably wouldn't have said that, but then again, it sounds like just maybe overtime with the track. Because
And
COTA, it's a very interesting track, the way that I couldn't understand how floor damage and plank issues could happen there,
yeah,
especially
exactly.
throughout sprint races where you have an extra race on top of that. Instead of practice, we have an extra sprint race and the shootout, so that could make a difference.
Exactly. The elongated weekend with,
Hmm.
sprint quality, the race, yeah, etc. Certainly it does. But yeah, of course I read things like that, and my, the main thing that pops in my head is, of course, Ferrari gonna Ferrari. It would be them that would screw something like this up. But when you consider that Mercedes got caught with their pants down too, it's like, okay, well, maybe not. Lewis certainly hasn't said anything to that effect, but has certainly noted that if you were to check everybody, regularly, then you know most teams would probably get busted, would get caught out, and part of me feels like that probably is frustration given how often it feels like one of the Mercedes cars is getting checked for such things.
Like at the least, you could have checked the teammates if you're going to do that. Because if you have a sample size of we checked these four cars and 50% of them failed, should probably check the rest of them. But I guess it just is what it is at this point now.
Yeah, and I can't believe, especially given that fact I've spent about 20 minutes bashing the FIA. To In fairness to them, if they were to check all 20 cars, we wouldn't have results of floor wear things until FP1. in Mexico, probably. We would come back with the
Probably.
results of that. The FIA is particularly in modern times is notorious for employing too few people to do too big a job. It's part of the reason why we don't get budget cap reports and for the previous year until a third, a quarter of the way the season, a quarter of the way through the following season. Is because that is a gargantuan task, and I think from what I understand, it's a team of like 8 people that look
Oh,
through
wow.
masses of basically financial data paperwork. So yeah, that's like I said, that's just the way kind of the FIA seems to roll these days. Uh, but
You can.
following on from further fallout from the well, actually, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, that was my point. That was my point. It's just the way that it happened. It still at the end of the day, people are going to look at it with raised eyebrows, no matter what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's really no winning here. I can just only hope that, well, A, frankly, Mercedes and Ferrari have learned something from all of this, but also B,
Please.
frankly, that the FIA does spread the love a little bit with the checks. But just following on from sort of the further chatter from the weekend is we are back to talking about track limits once again. One Mr. Trucks and occasional Xfinity driver, Parker Kligerman, does seem to really enjoy dying on the hill of track limits. I don't really understand why, but he does. He has been on a bit of a tweet rampage since practically the moment that the race, well, actually, the weekend wasn't even over
Mhm.
when he got started on the track limits debate. Um,
Do you know
I
how in High School Musical they showed Chad's character, no, 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 stick to the stuff you know? I feel as though sometimes Parker needs to do that. Just stay in your lane and worry about your sport and what you do instead of other ones dying on a hill like this.
Yeah, it's the that old meme. This is a weird hill to die on, but at least you're dead. I just I don't get it really why he feels so hell bent on doing this. Because he trotted out. I think I'll have to go back and look. Um, but this earlier this morning, he was
This
talking
morning
about.
he said something too.
Oh yeah, he did. He was quoting a quali lap. I can't remember who. It
Oh,
was
it
from the
was.
early
Oh, that
2000s.
was this Makita,
Oh,
a
Mika
qualifying
Hakkinen.
lap from the 2000s.
Yeah, give me just a moment. We are
Okay, yeah.
consummate professionals here at Chicanery, so we look at this stuff as we're recording. Um,
You want to make sure it's correct information, so it's fine. No
yeah,
guessing.
yeah, that's okay. That's fine. I'll take that. Um,
We're
but yeah,
actual people over here.
indeed. So let's see what Mr. Kligerman was on about with which particular qualifying lap, because actually the folks at the main pod basically QRT'd him about it. Oh no. Don't tell me you deleted that. Yes,
Oh
it was. It
no.
was Mika Hakkinen.
Oh,
He did not. I found it. He was talking about Mika Hakkinen in at Imola in 2000. And the part of this that he seems to very curiously forget is he claims that by today's standards of track limits enforcement that Mika's lap would have been deleted. It would not have been, because while yes he was technically over the white line, he also dipped 2 wheels in the dirt. You lose time when you do that.
exactly. You aren't gaining any advantage. That argument made no sense.
Yes, I just like it slowed him down. I just like what? Because to be fair, if he had have gained an advantage, even in 2000, he would have likely had that lap deleted or would have. Well, actually, what the FIA tended to do more back then was retroactively add a half second here, a half second there to deal with track limit violations. It's like, so no, this, like I said, this doesn't make any sense because, like I said, he would have gotten in trouble even way back when.
The comparisons I saw, I was like, this is just a little cringe. Like now you have people who come on your mentions like stick with what you know. I'm like, stop. You have other things to worry about. Let's just leave the track limits argument behind. But I just know it'll be something different next month for him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I say he does this regularly, so this is not
Once a month.
exactly. Yeah, this isn't exactly a surprise. But speaking of actually, grass and things and dipping wheels in the grass, there's been lots of chatter that maybe that's what needs to be done. Is that grass needs to get added, effectively added back to more of the circuits? Because it's worth noting that just through remodels over the years, a lot of these circuits actually did have grass runoff areas, but have since gotten rid of them. And is it one of those reject modernity, embrace tradition sort of things?
That's an interesting idea. I guess they need to figure out the way to get track limits to work because you see them going off all the time. Sorry. So you see them going off all the time. Is it because the track limits aren't as visible as they are? But I think it's an issue that they need to figure out to make sure they're consistent across the board.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And the big thing, I think it's a couple of things. First of all,
Hmm.
it's it's a bunch of race car drivers. If there's a place where they can find, especially when you talk about Formula One, a couple hundredths of a second, they're gonna take
Any
it.
advantage?
But also the other thing, and part of the reason why grass runoff areas were done away with in the first place was, well, it actually was the safety aspect. Grass can be a very good way of, you lose time if you dip too off, or if for some reason you just, you're all four off, it can work to help slow the cars down. However, we have seen a number of times if a car goes off sideways, it digs in, it rolls. We have also seen when the grass is wet, then the cars will basically skip across it almost like a stone, and it doesn't actually do anything to slow the cars down. We talk about stick with what you know. Ryan Preece's gargantuan accident at
Yes.
the Summer Daytona cutoff race was caused in large part because they had gotten a boatload of rain, and fighting in the back, he went off, and the car basically bounced and took off. And it's, I mean, don't get me wrong, that was a scary wreck, and that was in, a closed cockpit, NASCAR Cup car, and those, the
Hmm.
Gen 7s are, tanks. Imagine that in a Formula One car. They have the halo, and that absolutely helps with stuff like this. But if you can avoid it, well,
You
then you're
want to
going
at all
to.
costs. That is just, it is scary when you put it like that. You do want to avoid something like that.
Yeah, it's the reason why Paul Ricard, the home of the French Grand Prix, is the way it is. Everybody talked about it being an absolutely appalling circuit, and truth be told, Paul Ricard isn't great. But yeah, part of the reason why it's all concrete is just so when folks run off. That's the reason why Sochi is the way that it is, or I guess was, given that the Russian Grand Prix is
Hmm.
off the calendar indefinitely. The Chinese Grand Prix. I mean, we've seen this with a lot of the modern circuits. Just as a concession to safety. And it's tough. I don't have the answer to how you fix track limits, but also balance safety. And it's also worth noting that a lot of these circuits, they're not just Formula One doesn't just use them.
Hmm.
IMSA or WEC uses them. You've got, maybe IndyCar uses that circuit. Maybe, and the thing you have to really be careful about is MotoGP. Because what may work okay for, basically four-wheeled vehicles, that can be a death sentence for the MotoGP riders.
So a lot of scenarios to take into account. I didn't even think of that. So you bring up a lot of valid points that maybe Parker did not think of.
Yeah, and I think that's really what the issue is, being overconfident and undereducated, frankly.
I
It's
think
just,
that puts it correctly to some of what he's doing.
yeah, it's just, I understand, like I said, and track limits has been a divisive argument, truth be told, for pretty much as long as you have had motorsports discourse on the internet. I get
Hmm.
it. But yes, there's so much to take into account. And a lot of times it is a case of just sort of the lesser of all evils. I don't love all of the concrete runoffs either, but understanding how versatile modern circuits have to be. because these tracks don't make money unless they're booking everybody they can. It's like, okay, maybe the concrete isn't so bad after all. But I do find it interesting that the FIA clearly does not agree, because there has been some, certainly, well, I'm going to call it postulating by the FIA that they might lose their races across, the various series if they don't basically don't deal with the track limits issues. I'm not sure quite how to feel about it. Again, I called it postulating, and for reasons I'll get into in a second. But what do you think?
That I don't know how you would do. That's an interesting thing to do because I don't know how you would do that because you don't fix your track limits the way we want. We're gonna take your races. Does it sound like a good idea? Maybe it's a solid threat to maybe get tracks to do what they need to do to fix their track limits. But I don't know how they would do that or why. But I guess you'd have to see. I'd love to hear your viewpoint on it though.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Given that these contracts are inked, especially when you talk about Formula One, I mean, you've got the case of Spa, Zandvoort, I feel like one other circuit are locked down until like 2026 or something silly.
For a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these contracts are inked so far in advance. I feel like it, if anything, could actually become more of a pain for the FIA to unwind that than more than anything else. But additionally, Stefano Domenicali has, certainly made no secret of the fact that he wants all the races for, F1. 36-week calendar in NASCAR. Those rookie numbers. We're going to go all 52 weeks of the year. Well, at least that's, and of course this is hyperbole, but that is certainly the way he has posed the F1 calendar, and wanting to tack on races, talking about 26, 28 race calendars, which is absolutely mental to even think about.
Especially when you realize they go all over the globe. It's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. It flies in the face of certainly F1 and their sustainability goals and being net zero. It's like, okay, well, how are you going to manage that if you're going everywhere? And they still have not done a very good job at clustering, like the Americas together, or the European Grand Prix season. They don't really do all that great of a job with that, and that would take some serious reorganization to do. But beyond all of this, it really feels like, as F1 is pushing for world domination, that this is kind of a thinly veiled threat. Okay, well, you won't do this. Well, we can find a circuit that will, and we'll just go there instead. Which, again, I feel like is misinformed, because when you start talking about races this expansive and you're going to this many different circuits, eventually you're going to run out of circuits, especially through the FIA's grading system and the fact that F1 only runs on grade 1 circuits. It's like I would, don't get me wrong, I would love to see, F1 at like Brands Hatch again, or to see them run at, I don't know, the idea of like F1 at Laguna Seca sounds wonderful, but those are not grade 1 circuits. There's a reason why they do not go here anymore. And there's a reason why they had to, especially with COVID shutdowns in 2020, why they had to really scramble to try and make up something that vaguely resembled a schedule.
Didn't they, if I'm not mistaken, they reused tracks?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
No, you are absolutely correct. They ran at the Red Bull Ring. I think that comprised a couple races of the season. And then I think they were at Silverstone a couple of times, so on and so forth. But yes. And there's not an infinite number of circuits that meet the FIA's criteria to run. So you can squabble and grumble all you want to, but either you will directly contravene your we're going to have all of the races mandate, or you're talking about long-term contracts that you've inked that you're going to have to spend lots of time and go through lots of legal tape to undo. especially given that, like I said, the F1 or sorry, the circuits don't make money if they're not booked up. So they're going to
Hmm.
see that and go, "Oh no, you don't," and may well lodge legal action to keep their dates.
It's kind of like cut your nose to spite your face. It doesn't make sense, but I guess they'll have to figure this out on your own, on their
Hmm.
own.
Exactly, and and to be fair, there are other series that have had to kind of struggle with the same thing.
Hmm.
DTM and track limits. What on earth is that? They're all four off basically everywhere because it's fast. Most famously at the Red Bull Ring, ironically, track limits is an issue. We see NASCAR trying to figure out on the road courses how to police it, particularly when they're at COTA and like the Roval, how to deal with cutting the corner. And to be fair, they have a decent system.
Hmm.
At the Roval of, if you miss the chicane or whatever, stop to give back the time. Otherwise, it'll be a drive through. And
It's
COTA, if it's more than two off, so two over the white line, then I do believe that's an automatic drive through, if I remember correctly. To be fair, they've tweaked the rules a bit for that a few times over the years, but yeah, this is not a IndyCar, or sorry, Formula One unique issue. IndyCars actually have the same problem too. That was part of why it popped in my head. At the street circuits, they have to deal with track limits violations,
hmm.
but this is not unique. But I certainly don't think that the solution to this question is taking the race dates away. That seems like so much more effort than it's worth.
It seems like an overreaction. I don't.
It
It doesn't
really
really
does.
make sense. It's like, you know what? We're just gonna come up with the biggest threat possible we can think of for you to fix the track limit issue for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have to see what happens with all of that kind of going forward. So I guess one of those kind of watch the space sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, but before we wrap up and we start previewing next episode, so I don't know if this will be next week. We'll see. Um, but so I would really like to hear about sort of just any kind of standout moments or experiences, just sort of what you thought about kind of your inauguration into traveling to races. Because that is so cool to get to go to Formula One races. I had the pleasure about, actually, it's been longer than that. Good Lord, time flies when you're getting old. Um, but about, I guess that was about 5, 6 years ago now, the US Grand Prix with Honda. Um, but what do you think? What? Just yeah, just give me thoughts, feelings, anything.
I really enjoyed it, and I already tried. Me and my sister want to make it like a yearly trip for us. I don't. It was an experience I'll never forget. It was always something to do out there, and I also liked how I got to see not just Formula One. You got like to see Porsche's F1 Academy. It was good to see different classes of motorsports that I didn't know of. So I got some glimpses to something else, some other sports I would like to watch in the coming races and things like that. And I can't stay out in the heat too long because of a medical condition. So I got hospitality. So I have to say I was really fortunate for that. And you got to see team principals like Zach Brown. So it was nice to hear from him and see how McLaren works around. It was an interesting experience. I really wish everyone got to go to one, even if it's general admission. It's an experience I hope everyone can have. It was probably not probably was the best weekend of my life.
So now that you've done this and you've been to a race, other than Coda, maybe could we see you in Miami one year or Las Vegas if it sticks?
I don't know if the
Potentially.
funds will allow that one, but
Yeah, fair enough.
I probably would like to go to that one or Silverstone. That track, it just seems like a lot of people love it, and so I would love to make a trip out there one day just to see a race at that track.
Fair enough. And I guess to further kind of build off that, now that you've been, pardon me, now that you've been to been to a race, maybe go to IMSA.
See, I also might want to try like other disciplines in motorsports because
Hmm.
after seeing it, so maybe IMSA or IndyCar one day, just
IndyCar.
to
Yeah.
expand it out and see something different. Maybe not NASCAR one day, just to see different ones because I kind of this made me appreciate motorsports a lot more. I must say, seeing it in person is a different experience than watching it on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that you've appeared on this podcast, you're sort of an honorary VLV member now. So, maybe when the crew, meets up at, Richmond or Charlotte, one of the locations for Cup, we'll have to get you out there so you can hang.
Get to see everyone and appreciate my first maybe NASCAR race with all of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We would absolutely love to have you. But coming up and actually starting to take place as we record this, we have the Mexican Grand Prix. Um, so, lots to talk about Checo, but this is his home Grand Prix. You know, hoping he gets a win here. Any thoughts, feelings about the Mexico Grand Prix weekend before we close it out?
I haven't looked at the results of practice yet, but I really hope Checo has a good weekend. I feel as though he needs something like this, given all that the past few months have been for him. And of course, I would like a good finish for Lewis and Mercedes. So I just hope it's a good weekend for the people I root for, selfishly.
Hey, no, that's everybody in motorsports, not selfish at
Yeah,
all. But yeah, absolutely. So we will probably return to our regularly scheduled service to cover the Mexico Grand Prix properly. Also, we will do the IMSA season recap. That got pushed forward because we absolutely wanted to have Bria on this episode. So we
I
pushed that.
appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
JT
Yes.
is really missed though.
Oh,
She's the better half. She yeah, need her
hey,
back.
better half right here. Come on now.
No,
But
better half of like without me, she's your better half.
no, just joking. But no, yeah, absolutely. So we'll return normal service next week. Um, yeah, we'll have we'll have them season recap. We'll do a Mexico GP, and kind of any other news because, well, needless to say, the IndyCar silly season just keeps getting sillier. It is absolutely insane. Just when you think we've got this all wrapped up, then suddenly some other nonsense announcement comes from out of the blue. So we will have an update on that. And you may or may not hear from me on the main Victory Lane Vibes podcast for Martinsville, because that's coming up. That's the effectively deadline race to see who exactly fills out the championship for before we head off to Phoenix. So a little bit of a shorter one this week, but I think just as sweet. Once again, I thank you so much for taking the time out of your afternoon to sit and chat with little old me for about an hour.
You,
Um,
no problem. I appreciate being asked. It was nice to be needed, so I appreciate it. No problem at all.
Absolutely, and like I said, you have always got a certainly an open door here at Chicanery. So as you do more, we would absolutely love to have you back. But as for everybody else, thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you next time.